Okay class, this is the second video um, and what I'm going to do here is to repeat the same analysis that we did with the first video, but rather than use the regression line to estimate the trend, we use the moving averages. Okay, so at the lecture we talked about two approaches that we can use to estimate the trend. Seasonal component doesn't change, we're just working out averages, and it doesn't matter whether we estimate the trend using the regression line or moving averages. The approach to estimate your seasonal component will stay the same. What changes is the way that you estimate your trend. Now the figures, the values will differ. So if you use a regression line, you'll get different trend values than if you use a moving average. Okay, so we're going to use the moving average in this video to estimate the trend, and after that we'll work out the seasonal component again, and we'll basically repeat what we did at the previous video. So what I have here is the same data. So the total air passengers, the quarter, the time period. I've deleted all the forecasts that we worked out earlier on because we need to create new forecasts now. I've deleted all the trend value and the seasonal residual and everything we worked out, because those figures were the figures that we obtained using the regression line. But now we need to repeat the analysis, in this time using moving averages. Okay, so I've kept the graph, and I've taken away the trend line because the trend line was estimated using the regression. Okay, in this case Excel also gives you the option, if you wanted to look at how the moving average capture the trend, you can use the add trend line to visualize it. Okay, so this is the original time series graph. If we do a right click and we add trend line, this time we don't want the linear one, we want moving average. Okay, so if you use moving average, it tells you to specify the period of the moving average. If you use period 2, okay, you can see it's giving you a blue line. First of all, let's change the line. We want the line to be not to be a dash, we want it to be bold, and we don't want a blue line, we want, say, a black line. Okay, now let's go back to the options. So you can see that the black line is not very different from the actual time series analysis. What this means is if you work out the moving average on this data using 2 period, you will not wipe away the seasonal fluctuations. Remember, the trend is to show you the underlying pattern and independent of the seasonal fluctuation. And a good trend should tell you what the pattern is and shouldn't consider much the seasonal fluctuation. But if you work out the trend using the moving average with period 2, you can see that you can still notice the fluctuations. Yeah, the seasonal fluctuation is still evident. This tells you that for this data, a moving average of 2 period is not the best way. Okay, now we have 4 quarters, isn't it? So 4 quarters means that our moving average will be 4 period. So let's increase the period here from 3 to 4. So as you can see, if you increase the period to 4, you have a trend line that captures the trend without considering the seasonal fluctuations. So it's very similar to our trend line, but in this case it's not a straight line. Okay, but it's very close to a straight line, and you can see that it doesn't consider any seasonal fluctuation at all. This is what a good trend line should be, and that is why the number of periods within that you have is what you use to calculate your moving average. If you use any other period, you won't capture the trend. You will capture some seasonal fluctuation. So if we reduce it to 3, for instance, we can see that there is still some seasonal fluctuation. Yeah, so 4 is the best approach. That is why we explained that when you have periods in your data, the period should be the number that you use to work out the moving average. Okay, so this is just to illustrate this. You can close this for now. We don't really need to graph it. Okay, so let's work out the trend then using the moving averages. Trend, we'll call this MA, just to tell us that MA stands for moving average, just to tell us that we're working out the trend using the moving average. How do we do it? Again, member is equals to The key thing to remember before we go on to that, just a brief introduction. So we agree that our moving average will be for 4 periods, isn't it? So we need to work out averages for 4 periods. The first question to ask is, when you work out the average for these first 4 quarters, where do you place it? So is it going to be placed in quarter 1, quarter 2, or so on? Now remember that we said it has to be placed in the very middle. The middle of these 4 quarters is between quarter 2 and quarter 3. So we start first of all by placing it in quarter 2, and then we work out the average between quarter 2 and 3 and place it in quarter 3. So that is the approach. The next step is called centering. First of all, we start by placing it in quarter 2, and then we'll center this by taking another average of quarter 2 and 3 and place it in quarter 3. Okay, so we start from the upper class of the middle. Is equals to average, open your bracket, select the first 4 quarters, so it's a moving average of 4 periods because our data is quarterly, close it and enter. Now if you wanted to draw, you can draw it down, or you can go back here and just double click, and Excel automatically drags this down for you. Yeah, okay, let's go to the next one and do F2. F2 shows us that this second average is made up of 1, 2, 3, and 4. In other words, we've dropped the first item and we included the next item. If you go to the third average and do F2, again it shows you you've dropped the first 2 and included extra 2. So you can see that Excel has automatically worked out the moving average for you, which is ideal. That is what you want, okay? But what you need to go to the very bottom and ensure, okay, that the last average that is calculated includes 4 quarters, because 4 is the period, and if you get the average of 3 periods only, you wouldn't have satisfied the moving average conditions, because you need to make an average of 4 data points. Okay, so the last average is for quarter 3 2014. If you do an F2, it shows you that this is an average of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, but you can see that the last 2 have no data points. Why? Because we don't have any data for them. We need to forecast them. So this average here is not complete. Okay, so what do we do with this? We delete it. So delete it. Okay, the same thing, go to the previous one, F2. You can see again that it's worked out the average for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this last point here has no data, so this average is incomplete. It doesn't consider 4 points. Again, we delete it. Okay, so once we delete it, okay, it means that we have no data for the for quarter 2 and quarter 3 of 2014. In other words, we have no trend values. So that is a disadvantage of using the moving average, because you lose data points. So if we go to this other one and do an F2, we can see that it carries all the last 4 data, so that average is okay. So the next thing we need to do, we can select all of this column, okay, and we'll take away the decimals. So if you decrease decimal, you take away all the decimals. Okay, so we've worked out the trend. Now if the period that we had was odd number, it would be okay, because the values we calculate will just be at the middle. Right, as I explained earlier, the values of the average you calculate will need to be placed between 2 and 3, because that's the middle of the period. So this is not an odd number, it's an even number. And anytime you're working with even numbers, you always have to deal with the issue of centering, because the middle point will be between 2 values. So once you first of all calculate the averages using the top value, now you need to center and place the value in the bottom. Okay, so the bottom of the middle is 3. So first of all, we calculated using the top of the middle. Now these values, now we need to do averages of these 2 and place it at the bottom, okay, of the middle. So equals to average. This time we're just doing an average of these 2. Okay, this is not the average, the 4-quarter moving average. The reason we are doing this average is not to work out the moving average in general, but rather it's to work out the average between 2 values so that we can center them. Okay, close the average and enter. Okay, again, if you copy the same down and just check. So this one is dividing by 0, so we delete that. Just check that this figure here, do an F2, you can see that's included an empty cell, so this needs to be deleted as well. If you go to that very last one and do an F2, you can see it's included the last two, which is fine. Okay, so ideally that's what you want. So with the moving average, we've lost 2 data points at the top. We can highlight it gray to say there's no data in those points, and we've lost the last 2 as well. You can highlight it as gray. Okay, now this is called centered trend using the moving average. Okay, going forward, the values that we have to use for analysis is the centered figures. So this trend would have been okay if this was odd, if the period was in odd numbers. This would have been okay, but because the period isn't in odd numbers, we need to do another step by averaging the 2 period. Okay, so always remember that the centering needs to be done anytime you're working with periods that are in even numbers, because you need to center. Okay, so we can actually hide this column now because we're not going to use it anymore. We're going to be working with the centered, so we can click on that column and just hide. So the centered moving average is what we'll be working with going forward. Okay, now having done the trend, so this is a trend, isn't it? Having done the trend using the moving average, the next step again is to calculate your seasonal and residual. So seasonal and residual, enter. The seasonal residual is, again, remember the formula. The formula for your additive model is the observed value, or the actual values, is equals to trend plus seasonal components plus the residual. Now we've worked out the trend, okay, using the moving average, and this is in column L. The seasonal residual will be the actual, or the observed data, minus the trend. Okay, now the actual or observed is the total air passengers. If we take away the trend, we'll have the seasonal and residual. Okay, so we don't have values for this, so we go on to Q3 of 1995, and this is equals to total air passengers minus the trend. Okay, enter. Again, remember, you can do this manually for the other ones, but rather than doing it manually, just go to this corner here, double click, and automatically copies the formula all the way down. Now here, just make sure that where you don't have values for the trend, you don't copy any values for seasonal and residual, because as you can see, this is just taking this minus this, but there is no value, and it's telling you that the seasonal and residual is the actual value, but the seasonal and residual is not the actual value. Okay, so just delete it out. The seasonal and residual has a figure, but we've not been able to calculate it because we can't work out the trend, okay, for those period. That's because we're using the moving average. So make sure that there is no values here and there is no values at the very bottom, okay, and also for the period that we're forecasting, there's no values. Okay, make sure that this is very correct, because if you include any values here and you go and work out the seasonal components, you'll be working out wrong values. Okay, for instance here, if you wanted values, you could get actual minus the trend, and the figure you get is exactly the same as your actual, but this is not right. Okay, there is a trend value for this, but it's just that we can't work it out. The reason we can't work it out is because we're using the moving average. Okay, so delete this. Make sure there's no value here, because any value you work out here will be the same as your actual, but that will be wrong. Okay. So now that we have this data, what do? We need to work out the seasonal components, isn't it? To work out the seasonal components, again, we need to take the quarters and the seasonal and residual and go to the sheet and calculate the averages, just like we did for the regression line. So first of all, let's go to the next sheet and select everything. So to select the whole sheet, click on this arrow. Can you see the arrow there? Click on that and press delete. Delete will take it out. So I'll show you delete on the keyboard. Delete will be this. Okay, so you press that on your keyboard and that will wipe out the cell blank. Okay, then you can go back to the sheet and copy the quarters and the seasonal and residual, repeat the process we did for the regression line. Okay, so let's start with the quarters. To copy the whole cell, again, remember you can place your mouse at the very top, press Ctrl Shift and the arrow downwards. Okay, then you copy, go to seasonal and components, and right click at the very top and place values. Again, go back to the main sheet and do the same thing for seasonal and residual. So you copy the quarter, copy the seasonal and residual, and we sort the values and get the values of the seasonal and residual for each quarter, get the averages, and that will give us a seasonal component. Okay, so again, to copy, Control Shift and the arrow downwards. Okay, Control C to copy, go to the sheet, again right click and paste values. Now you can sort. So keep your mouse at the very top, again do Control Shift and press the arrow. So you selected everything. Before you go on, everything that hasn't got a seasonal residual needs to be deleted, okay, because it's blank cell. So delete this, and the same thing for the very top. So we don't have seasonal residual for the very top, so we can delete that as well. Okay, so select this, now Control Shift and the arrow downwards. We've selected everything. Go to data and go to sort. We're sorting. We've told Excel that the first is your headers. Okay, that's fine, and we want to sort by quarter. Okay, so we've sorted everything by quarter for us. Again, to calculate the seasonal residual averages, go to the very last row where you have quarter 1 and then equals to average, open the bracket, select all the seasonal residual for quarter 1 and close the bracket, enter. Okay, copy these values into the very last row of quarter 2, paste it, just do Ctrl V to paste, or you right click and you choose the paste option rather than paste values. The reason is, in this way you want to copy also the formula. Now if you do F2, it shows you what's included in that formula. As you can see, it's done the average for all the quarter 2s, but it's also included one quarter 1 as well, and we don't want that. So you can either change it to B21 here rather than B20, take that away, change it to B21, okay, or you can use the arrows like I showed you. Again, you copy this figure, copy and paste it at the very end of quarter 3, Control V. If you do F2, again, you see it's taking everything for quarter 3, but it's left one out. Okay, why? Because when it copies the formula, it copies constant cells. It takes the number of cells that you use for quarter 2 and it tries to apply it for this. But if you have some quarters without any seasonal residual, you'll find that you won't have the same number of cells. So you always have to check if you're copying the formula. Okay, if you're copying formulas, make sure you do F2 just to see that it includes all of the quarter 3s or all of the quarter 2s, all of the quarters that you're interested in. In this case, we want the average for all the quarter 3s, but if you copy the formula, we see there's left out 1. Okay, how do you do this? 39 means that you need to start from B39 rather than B40. So go here to your formula, click on the formula, delete the B39 and write 39. So it's captured that. Okay, now if you copy these values, copy, Ctrl C to copy and place it at the bottom of quarter 4, Ctrl V, and then you do F2. This is copied all the quarter 4. This is fine, you don't need to change anything here, so enter. So again, you come to the very top and try to copy these figures out. So quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3 and quarter 4. Okay, so we copy this figure, Ctrl C. When you're pasting, don't do Ctrl V, do paste, right click, paste values. Because if you do Ctrl V, it's going to try and copy the formula, but we don't need the formula here, we only want to see the actual numbers. Okay, so you do the same thing for quarter 2, Ctrl C, right click and paste values. Click here, Ctrl C, right click and paste values. And the very bottom, Ctrl C, right click and paste values. Okay, so what's the sum now? 66. So that's together sum equals to sum, open the bracket, select from the top and keep holding your mouse to the quarter 4. Then you cover the bracket and enter. So it's telling you that this sum, which should be 0, is actually minus 66. Now to take it to 0, we need to add back 66, isn't it? But there are 4 quarters, so we want to add back exact amounts for each of the quarters. So we divide this value, so we'll call this value sum, and we divide this value by 4. So it's equals to this value divided by 4. So each of this quarter needs to get add back 16.7113. Okay, so how do we do that? We say it's equals to this value. Now if we say plus 16, what it's going to do is actually minus 16, because the plus and the minus will be minus. But if you want to add back, you use minus. So minus and minus will be plus. Okay, so we add back minus this figure, but what we are trying to do is actually add back 16. Okay, so equals to this figure again, minus 16 means plus 16, yeah, equals to this figure minus 16 equals to this figure minus 16. Okay, so if we do the sum, equals to sum, open the bracket and sum all of this together, close the bracket. This is now 0. So your seasonal components should add up to 0. If they don't add up to 0, you need to adjust. So this didn't add up to 0, we have to do the adjustment, and this now adds to 0. Okay, so this figure now, we can copy all of this figure and take it back to the sheet. Okay, so go now, right click to copy. Remember, when you're pasting in your seasonal and components, you need to make sure that you're pasting the values, because if you paste without pasting the values, you'll be pasting the formula, okay, and you get an error message. So if you paste there, let's try and take away all the decimals. So you go here, decrease decimal, you've taken away all the decimals. So these figures has to be copied all through the data, okay, and it stays constant. Make sure again, when you paste copying from quarter 1 to the next sheet, make sure that you're pasting to quarter 1, okay, and pasting quarter 2 to quarter 2, quarter 3 to quarter 3, and quarter 4 to quarter 4, and so on. Now that we have this, we need to try and copy it to all of the data. Now in the previous video, I showed you how to do it using filter. So let's do the same thing. Highlight the column, the rows with the title, go to data, filter, go to quarter, unselect all, select only quarter 1. Okay, so this figure has to be copied all through quarter 1. So copy all the quarter 1, including the forecasted period, because the seasonal component is the same even for the forecasted period. And you paste, Ctrl V to paste. Before you go on, press escape. Okay, again I'll show you the button for escape. So this is the button for escape. Okay, if you press escape, select quarter 2, unselect quarter 1. Okay, so 815, Ctrl C to copy, and select all the cells up until 2016 quarter 2, and then Ctrl V to paste. Again escape, go and select quarter 3, unselect quarter 2. So this figure of 2368, you Ctrl C, copy, paste it in all the cells with quarter 3. Okay, paste, escape, Control, go to quarter 4, take away quarter 3, again do the same, copy that figure and paste it in all the quarter 4s. Then you escape again, and this time select all. Okay, so we've copied the seasonal component into all the data points. Okay, now you can take away the filter if you want. Now that we've done that, the next option is to try and work out. So we've worked out the seasonal components. If we wanted to get the forecasted, we need to extend the trend. Okay, so at this point, we've actually done our time series analysis. These actual figures, we've broken it down into trend, seasonal, and the residual. So to work out your residual, you can just say it's equals to, so let's say residual Residual is equals to, we can work out residual for the first two because we don't have a trend. So let's start from number 3. Is equals to, again, your trend, sorry, your actual minus your trend minus your seasonal components. So this is the residual for quarter 3 1995. If you double click it, you copy it all the way down. Now make sure for where you don't have a trend, you don't work out the residual. So delete everything from quarter 2 2014 because you don't have a trend. So this is the residual. Okay, so actually if you wanted to compare models, if you wanted to compare the regression model and the moving average model to see which one works better, you compare them by looking at the residuals. Why? Because the residual tells us the parts that of the time series that you can actually model mathematically. So if you estimate the residual using the regression and it's higher than the moving average, it tells you that the moving average is able to explain the model better, because a residual is the error term and a good model should minimize the error. In other words, you should be able to capture everything as much as possible. So a good model will be a model that has a minimum residual. Okay, so that's one way, but we didn't really look at this aspect, so don't worry about it. Just be sure that you are able to split the actual data into its trend components using either regression or moving average, and also its seasonal components. Okay, and residual is the difference between actual, trend, and seasonal. Okay, so the next thing will be for you to work out the forecast. Okay, if you're using the moving average, you need to work out what the average change is. In other words, you need to find out from one period to the other period, say for instance from quarter 3 to 1995 to quarter 4, what's the average change in trend? What's the change in trend? In other words, quarter 4 to quarter 1 to 1996, what's the change in trend? You get the average change in trend. It tells you that from one period to the other, the trend changes on average by such amounts. That means you can actually apply that amount to the last trend to work out what the trend will be for the next period. Once you work out the trend, you apply the seasonal components and then you work out the forecast. So let's try and do that. So what we are looking for is the average change in trend per period. How do we work it out? First, we find out the maximum trend, minimum trend, minimum trend, count the trend. Okay, so the maximum trend will be equals to maximum, open your brackets, maximum of what? Maximum of all the trends. So select all the trend values. Now this is just the numbers, don't include the title, just the numbers, and then you close the bracket and enter. So this tells you that the maximum of all the trend values is 11,564. What's the minimum? Equals to minimum, min, open the bracket, the minimum of all the trend values. Again, make sure you don't include the title, just the numbers. Okay, close the bracket, enter. What's the count? A count is you count the number of trend, so that's what we want. How many trend values do we have? So it's equals to count, right click, it counts the number of trends. So select all of this and ask Excel to count how many they are. How many trend values have we calculated? Close the bracket, enter. Okay, so F2 is the count of all the trend. Minimum, this is the MIN, that's the formula to get the minimum of all the trend. Again, this is the maximum of all the trend. So the average change in trend per period is equals to, just watch out the formula, open your brackets, it's equals to the maximum trend minus the minimum trend, close the bracket, divided by, so the slash sign to divide. So the slash sign is this one. So that's what you use for the divide. Divide by, open the bracket again, the count minus 1, close the bracket. So this formula was explained at the lectures and the seminars in which we looked at the time series analysis. So I explained this. Now go back to the lecture notes or go back to the solutions. So the actual solutions to the seminar problems explains what this is. So this is exactly the same thing we're doing. In other words, to be able to forecast your trend using the moving average, you need to work out what the average change in trend per period is. And the way you do it is to take the maximum trend value and deduct the minimum trend value. The figure you get is called the range. That figure divided by the number of trend you have minus 1. So that's what we've done. So we worked out that the maximum is 11,564, the minimum is 2,430. If you subtract the minimum from the maximum, you divide the figure by the count, number of trend minus 1. So it's a fixed formula. Okay, if you enter, this will tell you that on average the trend changes from one period to the other by 123. To take away the decimals, go to home and reduce the decimals. Keep reducing until you get to this figure by 123. So if this is this is how much passengers increases from one period to the other. Okay, how do we work out the trend for quarter 4 2014? Well, the last trend value we have is this figure, and that's for quarter 1 2014. Okay, now what's the difference between the period quarter 1 2014 and quarter 4 2014? Well, from here to the quarter 2 is 1 period, from quarter 2 to quarter 3 is 2 period, from quarter 3 to quarter 4 is 4 period. Sorry, it's 3 period. Let's start again. So the last trend value we have is for quarter 1 2014, and we need to work out and this figure tells us that on average from quarter 1 2014 to quarter 2 2014 the trend should increase by 123. From quarter 2 to 2014 to quarter 3 2014 the trend should increase by 123. From quarter 3 2014 to quarter 4 2014 the trend should increase by 123. From quarter 4 2014 to quarter 1 2015 the trend should increase by 123. In other words, this average change in trend is on average, is telling you that on average from one period to the other the trend changes by 123. It's positive means that it's increasing. If it were negative, it tells you that the trend is decreasing. Okay, so how do we work it out? So this means that for quarter 2 2014 it's equals to the last trend plus 123, which is this figure here. Okay, from quarter 2 2014 to quarter 3 2014, it means that the last trend you should add 123. Enter. Okay, the same thing now, it means the trend for quarter 4 2014 is equals to the last trend in the last period plus 123, and so on. So you can actually just drag this down if you want. If you drag it down, it means that Excel will automatically take the previous trend and add 123. It takes the previous trend, add 123. Takes the previous trend, add 123, F2. It takes the previous trend and add 123, and so on. So this is what we want. Basically, the trend for the next period, for each of the period we're forecasting, is the trend for the previous period plus the average change in trend. If we didn't have this too, we didn't really have it. But what you can do is to work out how many period do we have from this to this, multiply it by the average change in trend, and add it to the last one. Okay, so in other words, if you didn't want to calculate this, because again this is not really forecast, we didn't have this because of the moving average. Okay, say for instance you didn't want to calculate any of that, but you want to work out what the trend is. First of all, you need to find how many period do you have from this last trend to this. Well, from here to here is 1 period. from here to here is 2 period, and from here to here is 3 period. In other words, from this last trend to Q4 2014, we have 3 period. So if we have 2 period, it means that the trend should increase by 3 multiplied by excuse me, the average change in trend. So equals to 3 multiplied by 123, which is the average change in trend, 369. If you add 369 to 11,564, you should get 11,933. So let's try it. This is equals to 369 plus 11,564. So that's 11,933. Okay. So basically, if we didn't want to calculate this, we can still work out the average change in trend. All we need to do is to multiply this average change in trend multiplied by the number of period from the last trend, and then add back to the trend to get this figure. It may be a bit complicated, so it may be easier for you just to increase the trend by 1 by the average change in trend. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, if this is not clear, just see me, okay, during the lab sessions, when we have the lab sections this week. Okay. So see me. So once you have the trend, the seasonal component is already worked out. Okay, that's what we did in this sheet. So the forecast will be equals to the trend plus the seasonal. Enter. Once you've done one, you can draw down the formula, and Excel automatically copies the formula, trend plus seasonal components, all the way down. Okay. So again, from this row, you can highlight it to tell you that this is forecasted data. Okay, so again, we've done the analysis using moving average. First of all, work out the trend, then work out the center trend, because what we have is even numbered period. Then we work out the seasonal and residual, seasonal components, and again, if you want, you can work out the residual, but just extra work if you want. Once you have that, then we try to forecast the period. Q4 2014 to Q2 2016. How do we do that? I've explained to you that first you need to work out what the average change in trend per period is, and once you have that, you need to increase the trend from one period to the other by that figure. Once you have the figure for the trends, apply the seasonal component. In other words, if it's a minus, you minus the seasonal component. If it's a plus, you take the trend and add the seasonal component, and you get the forecasted data. And once you have the forecasted data, that's the forecast completed. So we've done the time series analysis, and we've also done the forecasting. Okay. So if you have any further questions, if any part of this video is not very clear, there are lab sessions that we fixed for okay. You can come over and ask me any questions, or you can see me during one of the seminars or at the end of any of the lectures if you have any questions or any clarification on any part of the video. But I'll advise you to refer back to the book sessions, chapters, and the sections of the book that deals with time series analysis, and go back to the lecture notes, go back to the seminar questions and the answers that I've pasted on the VLE, and you can go through the material again just to help you understand it. Okay, thanks very much.